The desert stretched endless before her, a vast ocean of sand and stone beneath a blistering sun. Heat shimmered in waves, rising off the cracked earth, distorting the horizon into a mirage that seemed alive. Sergeant First Class Elena Ramirez pressed her cheek against the cool steel of her rifle, her eyes fixed through the long-range scope. The crosshairs danced faintly, following her breathing. Every inhale, every exhale was a battle for stillness. Her unit had been pinned down for hours on the edge of a dry riverbed in northern Afghanistan. They were surrounded by cliffs and ridges, terrain that seemed designed to favor ambush. Dust clung to their faces, sweat soaked their uniforms, and every man and woman crouched low, waiting for the inevitable. They knew the enemy was out there, watching, waiting. But Elena knew more than that. She could see him. Through the haze, at a distance that most snipers wouldn't even attempt, stood the enemy commander. He was a dark silhouette against the rocks, barking orders to his fighters as they maneuvered into position. The commander felt untouchable. After all, he was over 3.5 kilometers away. That was a shot so improbable it belonged in textbooks, not battlefields. And yet, Elena had him in her sights. "Ramirez, what do you see?" Captain Mills whispered over the comms, his voice tight. "Target acquired," she replied softly. Her tone was calm, steady, almost detached. She didn't need to announce the distance. Mills wouldn't believe it anyway. The truth was, the shot was nearly impossible. Even the most advanced rifles in the world had limits, and she was pushing beyond them. At that distance, the bullet wouldn't simply travel in a straight line. It would arc like a thrown stone, curving under the pull of gravity, pushed by the desert wind, slowed by thin, dry air. Even the rotation of the earth, the Coriolis effect, would nudge the round off course. She had seconds to account for all of it. Her gloved fingers adjusted the scope's turrets, dialing elevation and windage with mechanical precision. Years of training whispered in her mind, equations she'd long since memorized flowing like instinct. Range, velocity, wind drift, barometric pressure. She had taken long shots before, but nothing like this. Her squad mates lay silent, watching. Her. Nobody dared speak, though everyone knew what she was considering. If she missed, their position would be revealed. The enemy commander would call the attack, and her unit would be overwhelmed in minutes. If she hit, they might live. "Elena," Corporal Davis hissed, crouched beside her. "That's insane." She silenced him with a raised hand. The world narrowed to the circle of glass in front of her. The scope wasn't just magnifying an image. It was erasing everything else. The shouts of men, the fear, the pounding in her chest gone. All that remained was the desert, the wind, and the target. Her heartbeat slowed. This was the place she knew best, the quiet, before the shot. Her father's voice echoed from memory, a fragment from long ago. "A rifle isn't about power, Mia. It's about patience. The bullet will do the work, if you let it." She inhaled. The desert air burned her lungs. She exhaled, steady. She squeezed the trigger. For a moment, nothing happened. The rifle's suppressed crack was swallowed by the open vastness. The bullet tore through the air, invisible, racing across kilometers of barren land. To Elena, it felt like eternity. She imagined the round slicing through wind, dropping inch by inch, arcing with inevitability. Then impact. The commander jerked back violently and crumpled to the ground, a lifeless heap on the sun-baked stone. His men froze, shouts erupting, panic flashing across their ranks. Confusion spread like fire. Without their leader, the ambush dissolved into chaos. Fighters scrambled in every direction, no longer a coordinated threat, but a scattering of startled shadows. Her unit stared in silence. No one breathed. Then Captain Mills whispered, disbelief heavy in his voice, "Ramirez, What the hell did you just do? Elena slowly pulled back from the scope, her face expressionless. Neutralized the threat. She said simply, but inside, her chest was tight. She knew exactly what she had done. Word of the shot spread before they even left the field. Drones confirmed the kill at 3,532 meters, a record-breaking distance that analysts would debate for years. Commanders praised her precision, engineers studied the ballistics like scripture, and journalists soon caught the story, though classified details blurred into rumor. Back at base, soldiers treated her like a legend. Some slapped her on the back, laughing with pride. Others stared at her with unease, as if she had done something superhuman, unnatural. Whispers followed her in the mess hall. Did you hear? She hit him from 2 miles away. That's not even possible. She's not human. But Elena felt none of the triumph they expected. To her, the shot wasn't a miracle. It was math, training, and timing. And yet, it carried a weight she couldn't shake. She had ended a life at a distance so great that her enemy never even saw her face, never even knew she existed. It was surgical, almost detached, and that frightened her more than the danger she'd been in. She cleaned her rifle alone that night, wiping dust and oil with practiced hands. The weapon gleamed under dim light, silent and loyal. But when she stared at its barrel, she didn't see steel. She saw the desert, the impossible arc of the bullet. The way a man had fallen without ever knowing death was already in flight. Her squad celebrated survival, but Elena sat apart, her expression unreadable. The impossible shot had saved them all. It had also changed her life forever. And deep down, she knew something else. When the army learned what she'd done, they wouldn't let her walk away. The plane touched down in the early morning, the sky above Virginia still painted with the faint bruises of dawn. Elena Ramirez sat rigid in her seat, her uniform neat despite the exhaustion etched into her face. Around her, fellow soldiers stirred, exchanging jokes, sighs of relief, plans for their first beers back on American soil. But Elena stayed quiet, eyes forward, hands folded on her lap. The impossible shot had followed her here, all the way across continents. She felt its shadow heavy as the boots on her feet. When the hatch opened, a wave of humid air rushed in, thick with the smell of jet fuel and grass. Soldiers filed out, into the waiting arms of family, friends, and military brass. Elena stepped down last. Flashbulbs greeted her before footsteps did. Cameras clicked in rapid succession. Reporters pressed forward, shouting questions she didn't have time to hear. Sergeant Ramirez, how far was the shot exactly? Do you consider yourself the best sniper in history? Some are calling it the miracle of Kandahar. What do you say to that? She squinted against the strobe of cameras. She hadn't been warned about this, at least, not clearly. A public affairs officer intercepted her, ushering her past the crowd with a practiced smile. Just keep moving, Sergeant, he whispered. We'll handle the press. But Elena had already seen it in their eyes, the hunger. They weren't looking at her like a soldier. They were looking at her like a story, a symbol, a headline that could be stretched across front pages. The weeks that followed blurred into ceremonies and interviews. In Washington, she was paraded before the cameras, a decorated soldier who had done the impossible. Generals shook her hand firmly. Senators praised her patriotism, and journalists spun her face into an icon of American precision. Every speech, every staged photograph, felt like a mask slipping tighter over her skin. At one ceremony, she stood stiffly in dress blues, medals gleaming against her chest. The crowd applauded as a colonel described her shot in grandiose detail. Turning it into legend, Elena's expression didn't change. Applause thundered around her, but her pulse stayed steady, her face a mask of stone. When the colonel handed her the plaque, she accepted it with a firm grip and a nod. She said nothing. "Smile, Sergeant," a photographer whispered, as though her solemnity was unpatriotic. She did not. Off stage, away from the cameras, the silence was worse. Soldiers she'd trained with before deployment approached her differently now. Some clapped her shoulder, pride shining in their eyes. "Hell of a shot, Ramirez," they'd say. Others, though, carried something sharper in their glances: jealousy, resentment, suspicion. They whispered behind her back, "Nobody's that good. Must have been luck. Or staged. She just got lucky, and now she's milking it." But Elena never corrected them, never defended herself. She wasn't milking anything. If anything, she wanted it gone. In the rare moments alone, she replayed the shot in her mind. She remembered the heat of the rifle against her cheek, the hiss of desert wind, the silence before impact. She saw the man fall, faceless at that distance, his life ended by physics and patience. Survival had demanded it. Her squad had lived because of it. But the clean finality of the kill haunted her. It wasn't guilt in the conventional sense. She had long since made peace with the realities of war. It was the distance, the inhuman reach of it. To end a life without ever being close enough to see the person's eyes, without even hearing his voice, that more than anything unsettled her. She thought of her father's words often. "The rifle will do the work, if you let it." He had never told her how much work it would keep doing, long after the trigger was pulled. The army gave her a new nickname, the Eagle of Kandahar. The press shortened it to the Eagle. She hated it. The name didn't belong to her. It belonged to a story they had built around her, a story of American precision and superiority, a story that erased the dust in her throat, the weight of the rifle, the fear of failure. They wanted a clean legend, not the truth. In interviews, she gave clipped, careful answers. When asked how she felt about breaking records, she said, "I don't think about records. I think about protecting my team." When asked if she believed she was the best sniper alive, she replied, "I believe in doing my job, nothing more." But the restraint only fueled the myth. Journalists spun her silence into mystery, her stoicism into heroism. She became larger than life, and yet inside, she felt smaller by the day. One night, unable to sleep, she went walking near the barracks. The base was quiet, the streets empty under the glow of sodium lamps. She found herself outside the range, the place where she had spent countless hours practicing before her deployment. Inside, she laid out her rifle on the bench, the same weapon that had carried her bullet across 3,532 meters of unforgiving desert. She cleaned it with slow, deliberate movements. Every piece of steel, every spring, every groove in the barrel was familiar. Her hands moved on their own, muscle memory stronger than thought. When she finished, she set the rifle down and just stared at it. A weapon was supposed to be a tool neutral, without meaning, but she couldn't help seeing the weight it carried. Now, to her squad, it was salvation. To her superiors, it was proof of American dominance. To the media, it was a miracle. To her, it was a question she couldn't yet answer. The calls kept coming. Interviews, invitations to speak, offers for books, documentaries, even movies. Public affairs officers reminded her that her story inspired people, that it built morale, that it mattered beyond her own feelings. But none of them were there that day in the desert. None of them had felt the stillness before the shot, the fragile balance between life and death resting in her finger. They wanted the myth, not the woman. One afternoon, as she sat in a briefing room, preparing for yet another staged event, she turned to Captain Mills. He had been with her that day, crouched in the dirt, watching as the bullet found its impossible path. "Do you ever think about it?" she asked him quietly. He raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "The shot, that moment." Mills leaned back, his face thoughtful. "Every damn day," he admitted. "But you saved us, Ramirez." "Don't forget that." She nodded, but his words gave her no comfort. Saving them had been the mission. Becoming a legend had not. As weeks turned into months, Elena realized something she had dreaded since the day the bullet struck its target. The Army wasn't going to let this go. They had invested too much into the story of the Eagle. She was no longer just Sergeant Ramirez. She was a symbol, and symbols were useful. For every ceremony she endured, for every headline that praised her precision, she felt a little more trapped. The spotlight didn't just expose her, it chained her. And somewhere in the shadows of military briefings and classified reports, a whisper began to grow. A whisper of another sniper, one just as precise, just as elusive. A whisper that the impossible shot was not the end of Elena's story, but the beginning of something far more dangerous. Elena Ramirez, the soldier who had never asked for fame, was about to discover what fame demanded in return. The conference room at Fort Beaver smelled faintly of coffee and gun oil. Maps and satellite photos lay spread across a long oak table, some marked with neat red circles, others covered in black smudges where names and locations had been censored. Elena Ramirez sat at the far end, posture straight, hands clasped in her lap. The generals spoke in clipped voices, their faces grim, their words heavy with secrecy. She wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to be on leave, maybe visiting her mother in New Mexico, maybe sitting quietly in a diner where nobody knew her name. But that life, the one where she could fade into the background, was gone. And now, sitting under fluorescent lights while powerful men whispered about a ghost, she understood just how far gone it really was. 3 confirmed kills in Kandahar province, 2 more in Helmand, said General Whitaker, stabbing a finger at a map. All coalition officers, all hit from distances exceeding 2 kilometers. Not a single survivor. Not a single trace left behind. The room was quiet. Only the faint buzz of the overhead lights filled the silence. Colonel Hastings leaned forward, voice low. "It's not just the shots. It's the timing, the precision. This individual doesn't just kill. He destabilizes. Every strike is calculated. Every officer taken was a linchpin in local operations. After each hit, Taliban forces advanced within 24 hours. Somebody's using this sniper as a scalpel." The word scalpel stuck with Elena. It was how she felt about her own role, sometimes surgical, precise, necessary. But there was something different in Hastings' tone, something colder. General Whitaker straightened. His eyes landed on her like a weight. "They're calling him the Ghost." The name lingered in the air. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. At first, Elena thought it sounded like myth, the kind of battlefield story soldiers traded to scare each other into keeping their heads down. But as she studied the files, the hair on her arms rose. Ballistics data had been logged for every shot, distances, angles, wind conditions, all impossible by normal standards. Yet every bullet had found its mark. She felt her stomach tighten. These weren't just lucky strikes. Whoever the ghost was, he knew what he was doing. Another officer spoke up, flipping through a dossier. "Intelligence suggests prior training. NATO believes he may be a former coalition soldier gone rogue. Possibly American." That hit harder than she expected. Her mind flashed to the ranges where she had trained, the instructors who had drilled her on ballistics until the equations were second nature. Could one of them be out there now, turning that same knowledge into a weapon against everything they'd sworn to protect? Colonel Hastings slid a photo across the table. It showed the aftermath of one of the Ghost's kills. A captain's body, slumped over the hood of a Humvee, a neat entry wound above the left eye. No chaos, no spray of fire, just a single devastatingly perfect shot. The signature's the same every time, Hastings said. One round, one body, no collateral. Whoever this is, he's as good as you, Sergeant Ramirez. The words hung there like a trap. Elena felt the rune's attention turn fully onto her. She kept her face neutral, but inside, a spark of unease flared. As good as me, she repeated slowly, her voice flat. Or better, Whitaker said. His tone was not accusatory, but heavy with implication. Which is why you're here. That night, Elena sat in her quarters, the dossier open on her desk. She read through every page until the words blurred, then forced herself to start. Again, each report felt like a mirror, reflecting her own methods. Long-distance shots, patience, precision, detachment. But there was something she couldn't shake. A pattern beneath the data. The ghost didn't just kill at random. He chose officers with influence, men and women who coordinated movements, who stabilized regions, who kept fragile alliances alive. Take them out, and the ground shifted overnight. Villages collapsed into chaos. Convoys were ambushed. Trust eroded. This wasn't just a sniper. This was strategy. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the air conditioner filling the silence. Her own impossible shot had saved lives. The ghost's impossible shots ended them in carefully chosen cascades. Two sides of the same coin. The thought unsettled her more than she wanted to admit. In the weeks that followed, the myth of the ghost grew. Soldiers whispered about him in mess halls and barracks, trading half-true stories like currency. Some claimed he could hit a moving target from 3 miles. Others swore he could fire in sandstorms with impossible accuracy. The myth painted him larger than life, untouchable, invincible. And myths, Elena knew, were dangerous. They made men reckless. One evening, while reviewing a fresh report, she caught Davis watching her from across the room. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" he asked. She closed the folder. "Depends. What are you thinking?" "That this guy's gunning for you." The suggestion made her chest tighten. She hadn't considered it outright, but now, hearing it spoken aloud, it seemed possible, maybe inevitable. "You're the only one who broke his record," Davis continued. "You're the only one who proved it could be done." "What if this is personal?" Elena frowned. The idea chilled her. She hadn't asked for fame, hadn't wanted the spotlight. But fame had painted a target on her back. If the ghost wanted to prove himself the best, then yes, he would come for her. Still, she shook her head. This isn't about records. Look at his targets. This is bigger than ego. Davis studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "Maybe, but if I were you, I'd still keep my head down." One afternoon, she was summoned again to the operations wing. Inside, General. Whitaker handed her a fresh report. "This one's different," he said. Elena flipped the file open. The victim was an intelligence officer killed, not in Afghanistan, but in northern Syria. Same caliber round. Same precision. Same impossible distance. Her pulse quickened. "He's expanding," Whitaker said. "Different theater, same signature, which means he's not just tied to one conflict. He's moving where he's needed, like a contractor or a ghost." The general's eyes narrowed. "And that makes him a global threat." Elena closed the file, her jaw tight. "So what do you want from me?" "You know what we want," Whitaker replied evenly. "You're the only one who can think like him. The only one who can counter him." For a moment, the room felt colder, the walls pressing in. She saw it clearly now, the path unfolding before her. They weren't just briefing her on the ghost. They were preparing her to face him. That night, alone in her quarters, Elena stared at her reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back was calm, composed, her uniform crisp. But her eyes... Her eyes carried the weight of something else. She whispered to herself, almost testing the words. The ghost. It felt strange on her tongue, both foreign and familiar. A rival she hadn't met, a shadow she couldn't escape. Somewhere out there, another sniper was watching the world through a scope, making impossible decisions with impossible precision. Somewhere out there, another pair of eyes, just like hers, was narrowing against the glass. And deep down she knew the truth. If they were two sides of the same coin, then eventually, inevitably, the coin would have to land. And when it did, only one of them would still be standing. A summons arrived before dawn. A young lieutenant knocked on Elena's door, his voice sharp with nerves. Sergeant Ramirez, you're requested at the Pentagon. Immediate departure. Requested. She knew that word. It was the Army's polite. Mask for ordered. Elena threw on her uniform in silence, her movements mechanical. She'd barely been back stateside for 3 weeks. She'd thought foolishly, maybe that she might get time to breathe. Instead, the impossible shot had chained her to something bigger, heavier, and now the chain was being pulled. The car that picked her up drove in silence through Washington's sleeping streets. At the Pentagon, security was tighter than usual. Escorts guided her through sterile corridors until she reached a windowless briefing room deep underground. Inside waited General Whitaker, Colonel Hastings, and a handful of intelligence officers. Their faces were stone, their posture stiff. On the table lay a neat stack of files, each stamped classified in bold red ink. Sergeant Ramirez, Whitaker, sighed, gesturing to a chair. Sit. She obeyed, though her jaw tightened. Hastings slid a folder across to her. We've confirmed 5 more kills in the last month. Iraq, Syria, Eastern Ukraine, all attributed to the same operator. Elena opened the file. Photographs spilled out grainy images of rooftops, distant ridgelines, and the aftermath of precise deaths. Officers with neat entry wounds collapsed where they stood, their men scattered in panic around them. The ghost. This is your problem now, Hastings said flatly. Elena looked up sharply. With respect, sir, no. This isn't my problem. I didn't create him. I don't even know who he is. True, Whitaker said calmly. But you're the only one capable of stopping him. The words landed like a punch. Elena leaned back, arms folded. You have hundreds of snipers. Thousands. Why me? Because he's better than them, Whitaker said. Better trained, better disciplined. He's destabilizing entire regions one bullet at a time. Every time he pulls a trigger, American credibility takes a hit. If this continues, NATO fractures. That's the scale we're talking about. And, she asked, her voice sharp. And, Whitaker said, his eyes steady on hers, you're the only one who's proven you can make the impossible shot. The only one who thinks the way he does. He's your mirror. Which means you're the only one who can face him? Silence filled the room. Elena's stomach knotted. She hated the way they said it, like it was inevitable, like the ghost had been created just to pull her back into the field. She shook her head. No, I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for the spotlight. I don't want to be your symbol. Find someone else. Hastings' jaw tightened. This isn't optional, Sergeant. Her hands curled into fists. You can't order me into a personal duel. That's not how the Army works. The intelligence officer at the end of the table spoke for the first time, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. With respect, Sergeant, this isn't personal. It's strategic. You're an asset, and we intend to deploy you where you're most effective. The words stripped away the last illusion. She wasn't Elena Ramirez, the woman, the soldier. She was the eagle, the long shot, the Army's living proof of precision. And now she was bait. When the meeting adjourned, Whitaker caught her in the hall. His expression softened slightly, the first crack in the mask. "I know you don't want this," he said quietly. "But wars aren't fought on what we want. They're fought on what we can't afford to lose. Right now, we can't afford to lose to him." Elena studied his face, searching for some flicker of humanity. But all she found was exhaustion. Men like Whitaker had been at war too long. They had traded choices for necessities, humanity for strategy. She gave a short nod, not agreement, but acknowledgement. Her quarters that night felt smaller than ever. The walls seemed to press in, the air too thin. She sat on the bed with the folder open again, staring at the ghost's work. The precision was uncanny. Clean shots, no waste, no panic. Whoever he wasn't reckless. He was methodical, patient, and worse, he was effective. She traced the lines of one report with her finger, noting the time of day, the angle of the shot, the retreat path. It felt disturbingly familiar. He moved like she did, thought like she did. The pattern was clear. This wasn't about random kills. He was dismantling strategy, one officer at a time. Her reflection in the window stared back at her. She barely recognized the woman she saw. Not the soldier, not the eagle, but someone caught between duty and dread. The next morning, her training schedule arrived. She had been reassigned to a secure base in Nevada, one used for advanced sniper development. There, she was expected to prepare. No other details were given. On the flight out, Elena stared through the window at the desert below. It looked eerily like Kandahar, empty, sun-scorched, merciless. She wondered if that was intentional, if they had chosen it, because it would remind her of the shot that had put her here. At the base, she was met by Captain Harris, a rangy man with sharp eyes. "Welcome back to school, Sergeant," he said, leading her across the tarmac. "Your orders are simple. Train harder than you ever have. Study every report. Learn his patterns. Because when the time comes, it won't be practice." His tone left no room for doubt. The days that followed were brutal. She woke before dawn, spent hours on the range, then hours more in classrooms analyzing data. She fired until her shoulder bruised, until her hands trembled from recoil. Every shot was logged, every variable scrutinized. In the evenings, she pored over intelligence, tracing the ghost's path across continents. But the hardest part wasn't the training. It was the feeling that every step drew her closer to something inevitable. The ghost wasn't just a mission. He was destiny. A confrontation written in her impossible shot set in motion the moment. Her bullet crossed 3,532 meters of desert air. At night, lying awake in the barracks, she wondered if he was out there somewhere, training just as she was, preparing for the moment their scopes would cross. She could almost feel him, a presence in the dark, a reflection she couldn't escape. One evening, Captain Harris found her sitting alone after hours, her rifle disassembled across the table. "You know what this is, don't you?" he asked. Quietly, she looked up, her eyes weary. "A duel," he nodded. "Exactly. And you better be ready to win. Because if you don't, you're not the only one who dies. He wins, and a lot more bodies hit the ground." His words were meant as motivation, but they only deepened the weight in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for every soldier who might one day fall to the ghost. But she couldn't shake the thought that somewhere, a ghost was hearing the same words from someone else. That somewhere, he was being told that she was his mission. By the end of the month, the choice was no longer hers. Orders came down. Deployment was imminent. Elena stood in her quarters, her bag packed, her rifle gleaming under the dim light. She stared at it for a long time, then whispered under her breath, "Not a prayer, not a promise, but an acknowledgement. This isn't about a shot anymore. This is about who walks away. The ghost was no longer a rumor. He was her horizon. And the army had made sure there was no turning back. The Nevada desert was both beautiful and brutal. Its mornings broke in silence, the sky painted in streaks of orange and pale blue, while nights fell sharp and cold, stars scattered like shrapnel across the heavens. In between, the sun scorched. Everything beneath it, baking the earth into cracked clay and raising heat mirages that danced on the horizon. It was the perfect place to train against ghosts. Elena Ramirez woke each morning before dawn, lacing her boots in darkness, the air crisp and biting. By the time the first rays lit the desert floor, she was already on the range, rifle slung over her shoulder, eyes narrowed against the wind. Training had always been part of her life, but this was different. This wasn't about sharpening skills. This was about stripping herself down to her core and rebuilding into something harder, sharper, more precise than ever before. Her instructors demanded perfection. Long-distance shots across ridgelines, targets no wider than a coin at 1,500 meters. Wind calls calculated to the fraction of a breath. She pushed herself past exhaustion, ignoring the ache in her muscles, and the bruises forming on her shoulder. Every mistake, every missed shot, replayed in her head until she corrected it. There was no margin for error. Not anymore. But physical training was only half of it. Afternoons were spent in windowless rooms with stacks of dossiers. Intelligence analysts dissected every known detail of the ghost's movements. Alana studied them obsessively, tracing his kills across maps pinned with red markers. Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Ukraine, his reach was spreading like wildfire. She memorized the terrain of each strike, the timing, the angles. She tried to see what he saw, to think how he thought. The unsettling truth was how familiar it all felt. His patience, his precision, his ability to vanish without trace. It was like reading her own reflection. Some nights she dreamed of him. She would be lying prone, rifle steady, her scope fixed on a figure half a mile away. She would adjust her aim, steady her breath, and then the figure would turn, scope already pointed at her, eyes meeting hers. Through the glass. She would wake with her heart pounding, the ghost of crosshairs still etched across her vision. Again, Captain Harris barked one morning. Elena lay prone on the hot dirt, sweat dripping into her eyes. Her rifle was aimed at a steel plate 2,000 meters away. She squeezed the trigger miss. The round struck the dirt half a meter off target, dust kicking up in the breeze. She cursed under her breath. Wind shifted 2 degrees. Harris called out, "You didn't adjust fast enough. Do it again." Elena reloaded, jaw tight. She closed her eyes briefly, feeling the wind across her cheek, listening to the faint hiss as it moved across the desert floor. She adjusted her scope, inhaled, exhaled, squeezed. This time the bullet rang true, the steel plate clanging in the veil. "Distance, better," Harris said. He crouched beside her, his voice low. "But you're still reacting. The ghost doesn't react. He anticipates. He sees the shot before it's there. You need to stop being a step behind." She nodded, though frustration burned in her chest. Being compared to him, even in training, gnawed at her. It was as if every drill reminded her that she wasn't just preparing to hunt the ghost. She was preparing to become him. The desert tested her in other ways, too. One exercise dropped her alone into the wilderness with minimal gear, ordered to survive for 72 hours while moving undetected through hostile patrol zones. Drones circled overhead, thermal cameras scanned the ridges, simulated enemy teams tracked her movements. She crawled through thorn bushes, lay motionless for hours under the scorching sun, buried herself in sand to hide her heat signature. Nights were spent cold and sleepless, her rifle clutched tight, every sound magnified in the darkness. And she was sunburned, dehydrated, and exhausted, but she hadn't been caught. When she stumbled back to base, Harris was waiting. "You're learning," he said simply. But Elena didn't feel like she was learning. She felt like she was disappearing. Each day blurred into drills and dossiers, shots and silences. She spoke less, smiled never, existed only in the narrow spaces between breaths and bullets. And always the ghost was there, not in body, but in thought. Every adjustment she made, every calculation, every moment of patience, she wondered if he was doing the same somewhere across the world, in some other desert or ruined city. She wondered if he was thinking of her too. One evening, Davis called her over to the mess hall. He'd been transferred to the same base, assisting with training. "You're turning into a machine," he said, handing her a cup of coffee. She took it, sipped, said nothing. "I'm serious," he continued. "You don't talk, you don't laugh, you barely sleep. I know you, Elena. This isn't you." She finally looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Maybe it has to be me now," Davis frowned. "That's exactly what they want. They want to strip you down until you're nothing but a weapon." She didn't respond. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "What if that's what the ghost is? What if he was someone like you, someone who got pushed too far, until all that was left was the rifle? And what if that's why he's so damn good? Because there's nothing human left in him?" The words cut deeper than Davis realized. Elena set the coffee down, her appetite gone. She left without another word. That night, lying awake, she thought of what Davis had said. What if the ghost wasn't born? What if he was made? And what if she was being made into the same thing? Weeks passed. Training intensified. One drill simulated a sniper duel. She was positioned on a ridgeline with a spotter, ordered to locate and eliminate a hidden target before it could eliminate her. For hours she scanned the terrain, every shadow and ridge a potential threat. The sun dipped low, the desert cooling, nerves stretched thin. Then glint. She fired instantly, instinct guiding her faster than thought. The steel silhouette clanged in the distance, paint splintering from the impact. The spotter exhaled in relief. "Nice, you got him." But Elena didn't smile. She adjusted her scope and whispered, almost to herself, "He let me see him." The spotter frowned. "What?" She shook her head. The ghost wouldn't make that mistake. Her instructors were pleased with her progress, but satisfaction never touched her. Each success felt hollow, like walking deeper into a tunnel without light. She wasn't becoming better for herself. She was being reshaped for someone else's shadow. One evening, she stood alone on the range after hours, staring across the vast stretch of desert. The sun had just set, leaving the sky blood-red. She raised her rifle, peered through the scope, and imagined him there, a figure in the distance, rifle raised, watching her through his own scope. For a moment, she felt the weight of his presence as surely as if he stood beside her. She whispered, barely audible, "Where are you?" The wind carried no answer. But she knew. Somewhere, in some other wasteland, he was asking the same question. And one day, their answers would collide. The helicopter's rotors thundered overhead, sending spirals of dust into the air as it descended into the remote valley. Elena Ramirez crouched low with her squad, the taste of grit sharp on her tongue, her rifle strapped tight across her chest. The landscape around them was jagged, and unforgiving dry mountains cut by narrow ravines, a place where shadows pooled like traps. This was the ghost's territory. The mission brief had been simple on paper. Establish a forward observation. Post near the ruins of an abandoned village, then sweep the valley for enemy activity. But everyone knew the truth. This wasn't just about controlling ground. This was about bait. They were being sent into the ghost's hunting grounds to draw him out. As the helicopter lifted away, silence settled over the squad. The kind of silence that made men shift nervously, checking gear, avoiding each other's eyes. Everyone had heard the stories. Soldiers vanishing with a single shot. Patrols erased before they even knew they were targeted. A ghost didn't just kill, he dismantled. And now, Elena was here to face him. They moved into the ruins under a rising moon. Crumbling mud brick houses leaned at odd angles, doors hanging open, walls pockmarked with bullet holes from wars. Long past, the wind howled through the empty streets, carrying the smell of dust and decay. Elena's boots made no sound on the dirt. Every step was deliberate, her senses stretched razor-thin. Her scope swept windows, ridges, rooftops, anywhere. A rifle barrel could hide, but there was nothing. Just silence and ruin. Clear, Davis muttered, though his voice was tight. They set up inside what had once been a schoolhouse, sandbags lining broken windows, comms antenna raised from the roof. By dawn, the village was theirs, or at least, that's what the report would say. But Elena felt it the moment she lay her rifle across the sill and scanned the hills. They weren't alone. The first day passed without incident. No movement on the ridges. No gunfire. Just heat, dust, and the constant vigilance of soldiers who knew death could come from any direction. By evening, Elena's nerves hummed like leave wires. She lay prone, eyes fixed on her scope, when a flicker of light caught her attention. A brief glint, high on a ridge. Her breath caught. She adjusted her scope, zeroed in. Nothing, just rocks and scrub. But she knew. He was there. Watching, she didn't call it out. Instead, she whispered under her breath, so quiet no one else could hear. I see you. That night, they heard the first shot. It wasn't aimed at them, not directly. A patrol had been moving half a kilometer east of the village. One man. Dropped, the crack of a rifle echoing a second later. By the time they pulled him back, he was gone. A perfect single-round kill. The squad went tense, every soldier scanning the hills, rifles pointed into the dark. But there was nothing. No muzzle flash. No sound. Just the knowledge that somewhere, out there, the ghost had struck and vanished. Elena didn't sleep that night. She lay awake, staring at the broken ceiling above her, listening to the wind rattle loose shutters. Every creak, every whisper of sand against stone, set her teeth on edge. In the silence, she thought of his scope trained on her, invisible crosshairs. Hovering at her chest, day two the traps began. They found one squad member's helmet perched neatly on a wall at the edge of the village. Bullet hole through the center. A message. Later, they discovered footprints circling their perimeter, deliberately left in soft dirt. No other sign of movement, just tracks, placed where they were sure to be found. He's playing with us, Davis muttered, anger simmering beneath his fear. Elena said nothing, because she understood. This wasn't random intimidation. This was pressure. The ghost was probing them, wearing them down, turning their nerves into weaknesses. And she had to admit it was working. By evening, men flinched at shadows. Every glint of sunlight on stone looked like a rifle scope. Every rustle of wind sounded like movement. Elena, though, forced herself into stillness. She spent hours behind her scope, glassing ridges, reading terrain, mapping every possible sniper hide. She whispered calculations under her breath, rehearsing. Angles, because she knew when the moment came, it would happen fast. Too fast to think. Only instinct would save her. That night, the ghost sent another message. Elena was on watch when she noticed a silhouette at the edge of the village still. Silent, almost blending with the rubble. She raised her rifle, heart pounding. The figure didn't move. She focused her scope, breath sharp. It was a scarecrow. A rough figure of sticks and rags, propped up to mimic a man standing in the dark. A single bullet hole marked the chest. Elena lowered her rifle slowly. Her hands trembled, though she forced them still. This was more than taunting. This was communication. She could almost hear his voice in the silence. "You're not the only one who can make impossible shots." By the third day, paranoia was eating the squad alive. Arguments flared over watch rotations. Men jumped at shadows, fingers twitching on triggers. One soldier refused to leave cover, certain he was already marked. Elena kept her calm, but inside. She felt the weight of invisible eyes on her at all times. Every time she raised her scope, she expected to find him already looking back. Then, just before dusk, it happened. Movement on a ridge. Subtle, but there too smooth to be natural. Elena locked her scope in, adjusted, held her breath. 4. A split second, she thought she saw him. A flash of fabric, the suggestion of a rifle barrel. Her finger tightened on the trigger, but she froze. Because at that exact moment, she felt it. Not saw, felt the crosshairs of another rifle, on her. Her skin prickled. Every instinct screamed that he was already watching, already lined up. If she fired, she would die. She pulled back slowly, her pulse racing, sweat beading on her brow. The ghost hadn't shot, not yet, which meant only one thing. He wanted her alive. That night, Elena wrote in her notebook by flashlight, her handwriting tight and precise. "He's testing me. He's drawing me into his game. He knows who I." She paused, staring at the words. Then she added, "And I think he wants me to be like him." She closed the book, the weight of the desert pressing in on her from all sides. The squad slept fitfully around her, but Elena sat awake, rifle across her knees, eyes scanning the shadows. Because she knew the truth. This wasn't their mission anymore. This wasn't about holding ground or gathering intel. This was between her and the ghost, and only one of them would walk away. The sun dipped low over the Nevada desert, painting the jagged ridges in blood orange and shadow. Dust swirled in the wind, glinting like tiny shards of glass in the fading light. Elena Ramirez lay prone atop a crumbling ridge, her rifle steady, her scope trained on a distant cluster of boulders. Every instinct in her body screamed that he was there. She didn't need to see him to feel it, the weight of unseen eyes, the faint shift of air across the ridge, the impossibly precise pressure of a presence on her chest. She had been preparing for this moment for months. Every drill, every long night alone in Nevada, every impossible shot in training had led to this. And yet, as the first shadows lengthened across the valley, doubt crept in. The ghost had been here. Not just somewhere in the distance, but here. Every movement she made, every breath she took, he had anticipated. The first signs were subtle shadows. That didn't be long. Glints in the rock that vanished when she looked directly. Faint depressions in the sand that suggested weight, but not shape. Then she saw it. A small rise on a distant ridge, perfectly aligned with her line of sight. A glint, a reflection of metal against the dying sun. He was there. Her pulse quickened. Her hands were steady, but inside, a storm raged. She had faced impossible distances before, but now it wasn't just a target. It was a mind opposite hers. A sniper who thought the way she did, moved the way she moved, hunted the way she hunted. And he had the advantage of surprise. She exhaled slowly, letting the desert air fill her lungs, and began to calculate. Distance, 3,200 meters. Wind, 14 degrees northeast, gusting at 9 knots. Elevation, 120 meters below her. Bullet drop and Coriolis effect accounted for. She made her adjustments with meticulous care. The ghost didn't move. Not yet. Waiting, watching. She could almost feel him studying her, measuring the angle, calculating her likely reactions. Then he fired. The crack was barely audible, but she felt it through the air, a whisper that brushed past her cheek. She barely flinched, dropping to a lower position. The bullet struck a boulder where her head had been moments before, a cloud of dust erupting. Game on, Elena countered. She reacquired the glint in her scope and adjusted for the wind, her fingers steady on the trigger. She fired once, twice, each round tearing across the valley with impossible precision, landing near him, but not enough to reveal her location. The ghost had not been hit. A thrill of recognition ran through her. He was good. He was as good as she had feared. And yet, she felt a flicker of respect. He was more than legend. He was real, and he moved with the same discipline she had trained for months to master. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the distant crack of bullets, the whistle of air as each round tore through space, and the occasional puff of dust where a bullet found the ground too close to one of them. Both of them remained patient, calculating, measuring. Each shot, each tiny movement, was a probe, a question posed across the valley. Who blinks first? Who makes the mistake? Elena thought of all the impossible shots she had made before. But none had ever felt like this. None had ever carried the weight of survival for both herself and the other person alive or dead. She realized something chilling. The ghost wasn't just a sniper. He was a mirror. Every calculation she made, every tactic she deployed, could be anticipated, and the same applied to him. They were locked in a dance that required perfect synchronicity, every fraction of a second critical. The sun sank further, turning the desert redder, the shadows darker. Elena shifted slightly, adjusting her position, lowering her profile, scanning the ridge lines. And then she saw a faint movement in the dust near his position. She waited, breath steady, finger on the trigger. A second later, another flash. The ghost was moving, sliding into cover with fluid precision, barely disturbing the terrain. He wasn't just waiting. He was playing, drawing her out, testing her patience, gauging her responses. She adjusted for his motion, recalculated for the slope, the wind, the distance. Her first round hit slightly ahead of him. He vanished. The second round hit slightly behind him. He was unpredictable, calculated. She felt a surge of adrenaline. This was no longer training, no longer preparation. This was survival, and she was ready. Night fell. The valley was plunged into deep shadow, the desert cold now pressing against her exposed skin. She switched to night optics, scanning the ridge lines for the slightest glimmer. The ghost was patient. He waited, knowing the cover of darkness would make her nervous. She imagined him lying there, breathing steady, scope trained on her, perhaps thinking the same thing, perhaps calculating her exact reaction, wondering if she would panic, make a mistake, give herself away. Elena whispered under her breath, almost a prayer, almost a vow. You won't get me. Not tonight. Not ever. Then she fired again. The round struck close, too close. She froze. A response came immediately. A shadow flitted across a ridge. A countershot fired in milliseconds. Dust erupted where her shoulder had been a heartbeat ago. The duel had truly begun. Hours of this followed. Both snipers moved with precision and patience, stalking each other through ridges, shadows, and desert scrub. Each exchange of fire was more than skill. It was psychology, a test of nerves. Both waited for the other to make the first fatal. Error. Elena's thoughts raced. She thought of her squad, their lives in her hands. She thought of every lesson from Nevada. She thought of the ghost, a ghost she had imagined, feared, and now faced. A pattern emerged. He was predictable in unpredictability. Certain times he shot, certain positions he favored. Slowly, Elena began to anticipate his next move. She whispered to herself, her voice tight with focus. Patience. Wait. One shot. One kill. Not just a bullet. A decision. Her finger tightened on the trigger. Then she saw it, a moment of vulnerability, a slight misalignment as he shifted behind a ridge. She adjusted, calculated, accounted for wind, elevation, Coriolis, and the faintest tremor in her breathing. The shot fired. Time stretched. The bullet traveled, spinning invisibly through the night, a silent arc over the desert. Dust erupted where he had been a heartbeat ago. Silence, then a movement. Elena exhaled slowly, heart racing. He had been hit, but not fatally. A hand rose, brushing against the dust, the figure sliding further behind cover. It wasn't victory. Not yet, but it was acknowledgement. She could match him. She could survive him. By dawn, both snipers had vanished from direct sight, retreating into the jagged desert. The ghost left nothing behind. No trace, no message, only the quiet echo of the impossible duel. Elena lay on the ridge, exhausted, muscles trembling, scope still in hand. She wasn't certain who had won, only that they were both still alive. Both had survived. Both had proven something fundamental. They were equals. And somewhere in the desert, he was alive, thinking of her, plotting his next move. Elena realized the truth, cold and undeniable. This duel was not just a confrontation. It was a war of minds, a chess game played across impossible distances. And the final checkmate was still far away. She whispered to the wind, almost a promise, almost a warning. I'll find you. And next time, it ends differently. The desert swallowed her words, but she didn't care. She had seen him. She had faced him, and she had survived. The hunt was far from over. The sun rose over the Nevada desert in pale, fragile streaks of pink and gold. Elena Ramirez sat on the ridge, rifle resting across her knees, her scope untouched for the first time in hours. She hadn't slept. Not really. Not since the duel. The desert seemed quieter now, but the echoes of the ghost lingered, woven into the wind that brushed her face. She replayed every moment from the night before, the flash of movement across the ridge, the precise calculations, the deafening silence. Between each shot, each instant had stretched and compressed time until the duel felt like a lifetime contained in a single heartbeat. The ghost hadn't been captured, hadn't been killed. He had disappeared as effortlessly as he had arrived, leaving only dust and the memory of impossible precision. And Elena knew he would return, somewhere, someday, perhaps thinking of her, as she thought of him. But she also knew something crucial. She had survived. She had matched him. And that meant she had changed. The extraction team arrived mid-morning, landing on the ridge with their usual precision. Soldiers scrambled down, securing the area and checking for residual threats. Elena's squad, though tired and raw with tension, moved efficiently, a testament to her leadership in the field. Captain Harris approached, hand extended. You did it, he said, voice low. You survived him. She shook his hand, though her expression remained unreadable. Survived was not victory. Survived was a start. Davis appeared behind Harris, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting the ghost to materialize from the wind itself. You know he's out there, he said, almost stating the obvious. I know, Elena replied, her voice steady but soft. And he knows I'm here. They exchanged a long, silent look. The weight of months, of impossible distances, of lives saved and lives taken, hung between them. Back at the forward operating base, Elena was debriefed. The generals and intelligence officers had expected a clean report, a simple account of the confrontation, perhaps with conclusions drawn about the ghost's patterns. But Elena gave them only the facts. Distances, times, trajectories, environmental conditions, no flair. No legend, no myth-making. General Whitaker studied her carefully. "You could have made him famous," he said quietly. "I don't want fame," she replied. "I want the ghost, gone or contained." "That's enough." Whitaker's face softened for a moment, the faintest shadow of respect flickering across his eyes. "You've done more than enough, Sergeant. You've faced the impossible. That alone is remarkable." Elena nodded without replying further. Words had little power here. The desert, the duel, the long hours behind her scope, they were her true testament. The media, however, had other ideas. Within hours, satellite feeds, leaks, and whispers had turned Elena's story into headlines. The Eagle of Kandahar returned. The desert duel. The sniper who faced the ghost. Elena didn't watch. She refused to read, refused to answer questions. Fame, she realized, was a leash, not a reward. She had learned that lesson months ago. The ghost, unseen, had taught it in a more brutal fashion. Precision, patience, invisibility. Even in public silence, though, her actions became legend. Young soldiers trained by the army whispered her name with reverence. Officers studied her tactics, dissected her calculations, and tried to imagine her patience. And somewhere out there, she knew the ghost had heard the stories. That knowledge was part of the unspoken connection they shared. A duel extended beyond sight, across continents. Weeks passed, and Elena returned to Nevada. She didn't resume ordinary life. There was no homecoming, no return to New Mexico. No ordinary routine. She spent her days in quiet preparation, refining skills, studying patterns, running simulations, ensuring that if the ghost reappeared, she would be ready. But she also began to notice the subtle changes in herself. She moved with a patience that seemed unnatural to anyone else. Her eyes scanned constantly, calculating distances, angles, and probabilities before they even mattered. Her sleep was broken, fragmented, because she was always anticipating. She didn't speak more than necessary, trusted no shadows, and learned the value of invisibility in every interaction. She had become what the ghost represented, a force of impossible precision, disciplined, unseen, and untouchable. And yet, unlike him, she still carried a fragment of humanity, a tether to life beyond the scope. That tether became her compass. It guided her, reminded her why she fought and why she survived. One evening, as the sun sank over the desert once more, she stood on the ridge overlooking the valley where the duel had taken place. The wind lifted loose sand, carrying it across the rocks like whispers. She could almost feel the ghost there, watching, testing, challenging. Elena lowered her rifle. She didn't need to fire. She didn't need to prove herself again. This was the balance, the knowledge that someone as formidable as her existed somewhere, ready to face her again, but not today. "Not yet," she whispered. To the wind, "Until next time." And for the first time in months, she felt a strange peace. Not victory, not relief, but clarity. The duel had changed her, reshaped her into something greater, something stronger. She was no longer just the eagle. She was the woman behind the shot, the mind behind the precision, the soul behind the scope. The ghost, wherever he was, would recognize that. Back at the base, Elena was given a choice. A permanent assignment, more deployments, or the chance to retire quietly. For the first time in years, she considered her life outside the military. She chose to stay, not for fame, not for legend, but because she had learned the value of preparation, patience, and vigilance. The world was bigger than any one duel, and she had a role to play in keeping it from unraveling. And yet, in the quiet moments, she thought of him. She thought of the ghost, Sometimes she imagined him smiling, acknowledging her skill. Sometimes she imagined him slipping through shadows, waiting for another encounter, another challenge. She didn't fear it. She respected it. And in that respect, a strange bond existed, a connection forged across deserts, ridges, and impossible distances. One sniper knew another. One mind mirrored another. And for now, the balance held. Months later, Elena returned to the training ranges in Nevada, watching new recruits struggle with long distances and wind calculations. She offered advice quietly, demonstrating patience and precision, showing the next generation that survival and skill required more than just a trigger pull. A young soldier asked about her experience, wide-eyed and eager. She simply smiled faintly. "You learn fast, or you don't learn at all," she said. And sometimes the hardest lessons come from people you never see. The soldier nodded, not fully understanding, but respecting the quiet authority behind her words. Elena stared across the desert horizon. Somewhere out there, the ghost still moved, still calculated, still waited. And that was how it had to be. Two forces of impossible precision, bound by skill, distance, and respect. Her legacy wasn't just the shot at 3,532 meters. It was survival, mastery, and the silent acknowledgement of an equal adversary. The impossible shot had changed history. But the legacy was hers to define, not the headlines, not the legends, not the myths. And she would be ready whenever the ghost returned. Because some duels never end. They only wait. And in the waiting, legends are forged.